Welcome to another episode of A Rehab Diary, the series. We are episode 14 and we have a very special guest with us today, Anton Zafir. Anton, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I really wanted to talk to you about, I guess, the mental toughness side of things when it comes to everything that you achieved and what you teach, not only students, but also a lot of people that come to your gym as a fighter. So I'm really keen to get into it today. And we start the podcast with the same question, and that is, what is mental resilience to you?
So mental resilience to me is just being able to overcome tough situations. That doesn't have to be physically tough. That can be mentally tough. That can be emotionally tough. And I suppose it's just how you view those difficult moments, and then how you're able to overcome or I suppose keep going forward, keep moving forward while you work out how to deal with the situation. I suppose obviously in fighting it's a little different. In fighting it's just about hitting those roadblocks in your training, physically, mentally, emotionally, and being able to work through, pick yourself up and keep going. If you get beaten in a round physically, emotionally, you still get up, you got that 1 minute, then you come back emotionally, mentally neutral, I suppose, to focus on the next round. So being able to pick yourself up in those difficult moments, find some fortitude, I suppose, would encompass what I feel mental resilience is about. I
feel like with regards to fighting though, like there are things in life that it might just be either mentally tricky or physically tricky. And the thing with fighting is that the resilience that comes with that usually incorporates, like you said, physical, mental, and emotional as well. So I think I'm really interested to know a little bit more about what got you into fighting and what you love about it.
Look, I started fighting, not fighting, I started martial arts, as a little kid. Mum got me in as a way of, self-defense, protecting myself, become a bit more confident. And then from there, it's just progressed. I left martial arts for ages, and I tried lots of different other sports, water polo, soccer, tennis, and I came back to martial arts. It was just something about it that I liked. You're pushing yourself physically. For me, martial arts was separated from the other sports because I really enjoyed the training just as much as the competing or the desire to compete. For my other sports, I loved the competition or playing the game, but I wasn't super keen on the training side of things. I loved playing soccer, but I wasn't super keen on just running multiple kilometers every single day, doing things like that. Where fighting or martial arts, I suppose, I really started to enjoy the outside of the competition just as much as the competition. And I think that's what made me stick with it. But I really love, I suppose, the rawness of it. It's just really trying to better yourself and your opponents as a way to highlight the inadequacies in your martial arts, I suppose, and give you something to then focus on and develop and put to the next test, see how you're progressing and see how you're developing as a martial artist. And, it brings back, I suppose, that kind of raw gladiator feel for a little bit. There's a little appeal in that. And I just enjoyed seeing what my body was capable under duress.
Yeah, amazing. And with regards to liking the training side of it more, I think when it comes to the actual fights, obviously the intensity and the emotions that comes with that, a lot of people would be drawn to. But what was it about the training specifically that you found you really loved as you developed as an athlete?
Well, there's nothing better than play fighting with your mates every day. That was enjoyable. You got to do those things every single day, and I suppose through martial arts you got to see yourself improving, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed, I suppose, the physicality of it, but also maintaining that mental composure under that physical duress. There's nothing like trying to keep your head straight while someone's punching you in the face or trying to choke you out, which I think separates it slightly from a lot of other sports. Obviously they have their own difficulties and their own complications, but while someone's trying to punch in the face or elbow you in the face, you got to try and keep that mental clarity under that physical exhaustion and trying to figure out the puzzle, I suppose, that's in front of you. So I like that.
When it came to the process of your training and developing as an athlete, what were some of the traits that you felt you developed through that mental toughness during that compared to what maybe you would have had before?
It made me realize that my mind wanted me to quit a lot earlier than my body wanted to. Basically, my body was more capable than my mind was telling me. My mind was telling me, you've had enough, you're fatigued, you need to stop, you need to have a rest. And through the training, I realized that my mind's just, quitting on my body a lot earlier than it needs to. My body was a lot more capable than what my mind was telling it, which was pretty exciting once you start to figure that out. And then you start pushing yourself a little bit more each day. And then you realize that your body's more capable than you first thought. And then you started to break through those levels, those layers. And you start to realize that your brain doesn't want to push you as hard as you're capable of. It's like the first limiting factor, I suppose. Once you get fit, then to get to that next level, you need to kind of break your mind and then rebuild it. Teach it that you're more capable than you were when you first started. So now there's the next level, or there's new levels that you can reach, which I thought was pretty exciting to see. Things that I didn't when I first started were such a far away. I couldn't reach it. I couldn't see my body being able to do those things. And then, after 3 to 5 years, that was just the new normal. And then trying to find the next level or the next part to reach for, which was pretty cool. And that's why I thought about the training that we did and how it allowed us to develop, and what was the process that we went through. Because obviously, we were just starting out, we were learning on the fly, and you kind of realized that you had to break yourself to build yourself. You had to go through what you thought you weren't capable of and realize that, hey, that's just the next level, and we can build on it.
Reminds me of something that I heard, just what you said then about breaking yourself to build yourself. And it was like, you can't heal a wound without feeling the hurt. And that's kind of similar thing in that situation. So when it came to realizing that your brain was telling you, I guess, to stop earlier than what your body was capable of, how did you work on actually, or did you have any strategies, I guess, that you used when it came to your brain telling you to stop, but knowing that your body is actually capable of more? What were some strategies that you used? Like, did you approach it more from a mental point of view, or did you approach it from a physical point of view? Or was it the experience that, like, after experiencing that and the realization that you just managed to repetitively practice it?
I think when I first started, it was obviously self-talk. And in my case, I was a very negative talker. So I wasn't a positive affirmation kind of guy. I was the complete opposite. So, I'd be like, you fat piece of shit, you better get up this hill, like stuff like that. Like I was mean to myself. I was like, how can you fight if you can't even get your fat ass up this hill? Like, you're gonna quit in the fight because you're gonna quit on this hill, like stuff like that. Like, I was very negative to myself, but I was fighting with myself in my head. Like I was having this little voice in my head that doubted me, and I was like, oh, screw you, I'm gonna show you. Like that was the way in which I do. Like, a lot of people are positive. A few of my mates are the same way. They're kind of, they're negative. They're negative towards themselves in their head, which allows me to kind of have that fight in my head at the same time my body's doing something that I didn't think was possible at the time. So it kind of distracted my body from what it was doing by having this fight in its head. And then by the time I'd finished the fight in my head, I'd finished whatever activity that I was doing, and then realized that, I was capable, and that little voice in my head was wrong anyway. So, I developed that self-confidence by beating that voice in my head and achieving the goal that I set out for that day. And I was lucky that obviously when I first started, I had some good training. I had one good training partner that was basically, we trained every day, and we would set out rounds for each other, and we would come up with, 3 5-minute rounds of the worst exercises or movements that we could think of, and we'd try and make the other person quit. So in those 3 rounds, I was trying to make him quit, and then he would come up with 3 rounds that would try and make me quit. And I suppose for us, we were very competitive, so neither of us wanted to give each other the satisfaction of quitting. So again, it was that self-talk while we were doing it, going, hey, you came up with the worst thing and it's not going to break me. You came up with the worst thing and I'm still going to finish it. And then after we'd done the rounds, we then had to do our own rounds that we came up with. And then from those 6 rounds, we picked the worst 5 rounds, and then we both did them. So we just tried to find things that were tough physically and mentally, that try to make each other quit. And I suppose for us, it was our competitiveness, the arrogantness, stubbornness that just made us go, hey, I'm not going to give you the satisfaction of quitting or pulling out. And then once we finished it, we were like, hey, we can actually do this. It's our mind telling us that we can't, not our body. Our body's physically capable. It was just at the start, before we even began, our mind is going, you're not going to be able to make this. You can't do it. It's too tough. And then obviously other things for us overtook that self-doubt, I suppose. And then once we completed it, we realized that we developed some mental resilience, and the voice in our head was just there to try and hold us back, and we had to try and find ways to quiet it.
I think what's interesting about that is, like, everyone has that voice inside their head, and with your approach, you kind of not sort of fought with yourself, but you were strengthening that voice internally prior to even having someone there doing it externally as well. So you would go into those situations where it was coming from your training partner under the, I guess, in the state in which normally you would be, I guess, telling that voice to be a certain way by yourself, but then going into that voice is a lot stronger to, I guess, go at somebody else in that instinct. So it's actually, that's really quite interesting. Do you think with regards to that, what you were saying about that voice in your head and how you were quite a negative self-talker, do you think there's actually but how that actually helped you build confidence? Do you think it's actually more harmful when people are just to positive affirmations in the mirror all the time? Like, do you think that's actually helpful?
I don't know. I suppose it'll depend on the person. Everyone's different. Like, I couldn't say that it was a negative thing. I couldn't say it was a positive thing. But for me, I didn't have a huge amount of confidence when I first started in my ability, right? So I developed that confidence through my training. So I trained harder and longer than everybody else. That was my goal. I was like obsessed, like if you're going to do a kilometer, I'm going to do 2 kilometers. If you're going to train for an hour, train for 2 hours. I'm going to do twice as much more often than you are. And I'm going to develop my confidence through that. So I suppose for my fighting, I just basically did as much. I became obsessed, and I think obsession is a huge part of it. And I think trying to break myself continuously in each session developed my confidence towards the fight. Like when I actually got into the ring or the cage, it was kind of like the things I put my body through leading up to this is not even on the same level as the fight itself. So that gave me confidence. How some people just have that innate confidence in themselves. I didn't have that I didn't have that. I developed my confidence through my training. And I suppose for me, that negative self-talk helped to build that confidence. Every time I had that voice in my head telling me that you're capable, my actions overshadowed it. So when I ever had that seed of doubt, leading up to a fight or that, or just before I went out to fight, that other side was like, hey, every time you told yourself you weren't able of doing something, you were able to overcome it. You know, you were able to show that you were capable. So for me, being that negative, I suppose, was beneficial to me. I suppose everybody's going to be different. I don't know. I don't know if a tennis player is going to be better saying, you fat ass, get yourself around the court, or you're not going to win this point. Or they might be, hey, you know, like each point is different. You know, we lost that point. Well, we'll look for this next point. Well, I'd probably sit there going, far, hey, you just lost this point. You suck. You better win the next point. Otherwise, you're going to suck even more kind of thing. Which, you know, in the situation's probably not that beneficial. You know what I'm saying? For a tennis player, you know, they talk about the moment, or a squash player, the moment that point is finished, that point is done. There's no point in looking back at that point. There's no point in thinking about that point. You know, the next point is the point that you need to focus on. And I suppose, obviously, in competition, that's the same for fighting. There's no point in thinking about the last round. You got to focus on the next round. But leading up to the fight or leading up to the activity, I suppose it might depend on the athlete themselves.
Do you think that I guess level of toughness or inner discipline can be taught, or do you think it's something that is just has to be instilled within somebody?
No, I think it can be taught. We teach it with our guys. Obviously, you know, that negative self-talk is not something that I indulge in my students, you know, but we put our students in those difficult, tough situations, and then we are talking to them while they are struggling, you know, telling them that they're able, they're capable, you know, that it's going to be a fight. It's supposed to be difficult. It's tough, you know, that this is the difference between a beginner and more experienced. You know, this is the difference between a casual and a fighter. You want to fight, this is what it's about. You know, you're capable of doing it, get up and keep going, you know. And we're talking to them, I suppose it's more positive. I don't know what's going through their head at the time, but externally we are positive and encouraging during those moments where we're asking the most from them. So, you know, they see their teammates around them, encouraging them. And then, you know, some of them are capable of doing it. Some of them aren't. You know, we've had guys that just can't do it. And, you know, they eventually have maybe one fight and then that's it. You know, they're not able to do it. And some guys come in and they have no confidence, no mental resilience, nothing. And then, you know, after 3 or 4 years, they're the best. You know, they're working hard, they're pushing the hardest. So it can definitely be taught, but I don't think everybody wants to go through the harshness or the toughness that is required of them to develop it, right?
I think what's interesting about that too is like, just because, like you said, it can be taught, but it doesn't necessarily have to be taught the same way for every single person. So, and I think that as a coach, that's probably something that you've learned over time, where you might actually find that, you know, one of your guys might have a bit more of a similar upbringing or mindset that you did, so he responds better to a bit more of that intensity and, let's say, negativity, whereas this bloke over here has a very rational way of thinking, so doing it in a way that's a bit more, you know, positive or educational is going to tap into that side of him that's going to help him understand his body. And like, as a coach, that would be something that you would have to, I guess, learn and adjust to over time to see how you can get the best out of your people too, and understand that everyone does respond and react a little bit different.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure I've got it wrong. I'm sure I've lost some people over the years because I've gotten it wrong. I've read it wrong. You know, I'm learning just as much as the next person, you know, like it's trial and error. Some people do see it different ways. Some people respond better, you know, and that's something that over the years I'd like to think that I've got better at it, you know, reading how people relate or how people develop and changing the way in which I coach to better those people. I'm sure I'm going to make lots of mistakes, and I'm sorry for any of the people that I made mistakes in the past and for those that I'm going to make in the future. But, you know, like my intention is to help you improve yourself. Like nothing that I ever do for my guys is in the gym is to make them worse. I want every single one of my guys to be better than I ever was. Like, that's my goal. Like, I want my guys to achieve more than I did, to get to a higher level if that's what they want. Like, that is my honest goal, that I want to see everyone that steps into my gym succeed and achieve as much as they can in whatever they want to do. So that's the way.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I guess, achievement in which you have succeeded, or the levels in which you've got to, obviously making it up to the level of the UFC is quite incredible. Do you think, what is something that you feel, obviously you've got fighters, but there's going to be the difference between the guys that make it to those elite levels like yourself. When it comes to that elite mindset, what is something that at that level you feel has to separate you apart from, person B who makes it to the level below you?
It's funny, when I first started just sport in general, I was told something that was, I thought, very, very true, and still stands today. It's like 60% of talent, 30% of good timing, and 10% of knowing the right people. And I still believe that to an extent, that being at the right time being in the right moment at the right time is super important. Knowing the right people is super important. And then obviously having the skills capable once you get those opportunities to succeed is obviously important. But if we look at the athlete, I think obsession will separate the difference between an elite and a amateur. Someone that every living moment, I suppose, is directed at making them better at what they want to achieve. And, it doesn't have to be that I sit at the gym 24 hours and that's all I do, but it means, like, I get up at a certain time that I say I'm going to do it. I get up, I train, I fuel myself correctly, correct food, correct nutrition. I do the right recoveries, the rehab, I'm training properly, I'm getting the right sleep. It doesn't have to be, like I said, sitting at the gym for 12 hours a day, but you treat yourself like a professional, you treat yourself like an elite athlete, and you carry yourself the same way. You're very coachable, you help out your teammates, you're there when they need them the same way you expect them to be there when they're needed. And then obviously, hopefully, that your obsession matches your talent. Some people just don't have the skills or the talent, or, whatever it is that matches. But I don't think talent will beat an obsessed athlete if they're not willing to work hard. We talk about at time, talent is not enough anymore. So you need that work ethic, the right coaches, the right teammates, and then the right opportunities, I think is the key as well for these guys. But I think in today's age, anybody that wants to do it in martial arts, you're in a golden era. It's not like when I was doing it, and it wasn't even like it before me. When I was doing it, there was not nearly as many shows or opportunities for the fighters to fight on. And then even if you go back 10 years before my time, like, there was even less. Like, we had, I think, 1 or 2 MMA fights a year. And the guys that wanted to reach that elite level, they had to go overseas. They had to travel. Now, I think we got MMA shows nearly once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks for the year. So the guys' opportunities to compete and travel and train is so much better than where it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. Opportunities can no longer be a hindrance. So I suppose it comes back to the athlete themselves, and having the right opportunity. I suppose being at the right moment for that opportunity. Like, constantly lots of fighters, the last minute fights is where those opportunities occur. And if you're not training consistently, you're not in shape consistently, then you can't take those opportunities when they're presented, and that might cost you. So it's different from other sports, but a lot of fighters, they have a fight and then they take 4 months off, they blow up 15 kilos, they don't train. and then an opportunity comes along, which is an amazing opportunity, and they can't do it because they're overweight and they haven't been training. So like I said, just consistently treating themselves as a professional is so important so they can take advantage of those opportunities when they show up.
We're saying about that being, I guess, the fundamental at the basis of it all. When you look at being in those positions to get those opportunities, yes, it's an opportunity, but there's also a reason that you were in a position to receive it in the first place. And if you don't have that continuous attention and effort to that, sometimes opportunities you might not even see. And like you said, those opportunities could come from who you know, which comes from the effort of actually being in positions or meeting people or building those relationships because you're obsessed in that. Well, let's use the word obsessed in that space. So sometimes too, like I look at, different opportunities that I've been presented at, but take away the groundwork I've done beforehand, that would have never been a thing. So yes, it's, I guess, call it right place, right time. But then you kind of go, for me to be even in the right place at the right time, I've got to be at a certain point with it. And that takes all of this effort for me to be receptive of those opportunities. So then with that being said, how important to you do you feel having a coach, having the right people around you is with regards to not just growth as an athlete, but as a professional, as a coach, as a person?
I think it's very important. And, like you said, it's not just in a sporting arena. Like this is something that I tell my guys heaps is the skills that you learn in the gym, you can take away with whatever you do. Like I said, perfect example, like the opportunities that you've been given wouldn't have been successful if you hadn't worked your ass off for the last, 10 years. You wouldn't have been able to take advantage and then take them to the next level. Like those things don't come along to those that haven't earned it, I suppose, or deserve it. So having coaches, I think, is important because it helps to direct the athletes into the right direction. Having teammates around them provides them the opportunity to learn from each other. In our case, obviously, we need bodies. Martial arts, you need someone to be wrestling with, rolling with, striking with. So teammates play a huge part. And having consistent teammates. I know this is one of the biggest pet hates from all gyms across the world is when you are getting ready for a fight and there's 8 to 10 guys helping you out, getting you ready there every day. And then when it's their time to fight, you've disappeared. You're like, I'm having a rest for 4 or 5 months, and you sit there going, no, that's not how it works. You got to be a team player. Like you got to provide the opportunity for your teammates the same way they did for you. So for us, teammates is super important, and being readily available for your teammates is, I think, part of that teamwork that we talk about. You're a team, you're not an individual. And I talk about this heaps. Even though you fight by yourself, you didn't get ready by yourself. You didn't make it to the cage by yourself. So therefore, you need to give back to those around you that helped you. And I know, talking to a lot of coaches that I have, it's their number one pet hate. You disappearing after your fight and leaving your teammates by themselves. So coaches are important, teammates are important, and then having the right people around you to support what you're doing. If you don't have people that support what you're doing or slightly understand what you're doing, it's going to be difficult. And I suppose that's going to be difficult in everything. Like I said, if you're spending every waking minute learning how to be a doctor, and your partner at home's like, oh, you don't spend enough time. You spend too much, you spend too much time at work. You don't understand. You're going to have that outside pressure, and it's not going to be conducive to effectively learning, right? So I think everything needs to come together. Obviously, when you get to elite levels, it even comes down to the finer details of your nutrition and your strength and conditioning. Some athletes outsource that. A couple of my guys, they have nutritionists and they have strength and conditioning coaches that give them plans. It makes the rest of their lives simpler so they can focus on what's actually important.
It's really important when it comes to, I guess, your teammates, I guess, is probably the best word to describe it. Not so much sort of support systems globally, but teammates. What do you think some of the most important aspects or things are that you help build that, like strengthen that and build that trust within that unit?
Being uncomfortable together, doing uncomfortable things. Like nothing beats building that team camaraderie than suffering together. I talk about it heaps. Through suffering builds friendship. Through suffering builds teams. If you're suffering with the person next to you, doing things tough, counting on each other, leaning on each other through those tough times, when you come out or when you finish it, whether it's a training session, it's a tough weekend, it's tough, whatever it is, you're going to come back, you're going to come out closer because you succeeded together. I think that's why we you talk about in the army where those guys are so close with the guys in their platoon, because their lives literally count on each other. And, leading up to that moment, they have gone through hell together, which builds that teammate, that teammateship, that team camaraderie, that team trust. And I suppose I try and use the same thing in the gym. We all suffered together. Obviously in our case, it's physically. And then by succeeding and finishing it, we build together stronger as a team.
Having that mutual suffering, it's also that connection, that connection that's kind of unexplainable, but it also builds a level of trust that then will help you in those positions of mental resilience as well, because that that person that's in your corner that's telling you to keep pushing, keep going, you're kind of going to go, well, bullshit if you haven't been through this, compared to somebody that if you've seen how they mutually suffer, how they handle it, knowing they've achieved it, knowing that they have confidence that you will, it's that positive reinforcement in your behaviors as well when you've got so much external pressures and that voice in your head is telling you the opposite.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, that's true. I think in some cases I know that the best athletes don't make the best coaches, and the best coaches weren't necessarily the best athletes. So I think sometimes the trust that you have in your coach is based on the belief system that they've instilled in the gym. And then the trust that you have in your team is built on that same suffering that you guys go through, and that, you're bleeding, you're crying, you're sweating together every day, and that builds that closeness.
That's so true. One thing that that I wanted to ask you about, which really kind of intrigues me, is how do you go about maintaining composure in a state of pain and adrenaline and fight or flight, I guess?
By practicing it, like that's what play fighting, or what we call sparring or going live, stimulates. Or sorry, not stimulates, simulates. And then obviously stimulates that fight or flight response. When guys first come in, it's amazing to watch them when they spar, and everybody else is laughing and joking and punching each other, and you might get a blood nose or something like that, but everybody's smiling, laughing, and these new guys are like so serious and so focused, and they think it's a real fight. They're like, oh my gosh, my life depends on this. I gotta focus. Someone's trying to punch me in the face, and then after a while, they have their first fight, and they're like, whoa, this is what actually fighting is like. And then they come back to the gym and they realize that the sparring they thought was fighting is actually playing. So they've already suddenly slowed themselves down and started to assess that fight or flight response. And then obviously what we do is we put it in a more stressful situation, more pressure, harder work, to try and increase that flight or fight response, and get them to consciously understand the situation and trying to realize what their body is saying and try and get their mind to focus on what needs to be done under that situation. So I think that's important. You know, what happens is when you see guys for their first time being put through tough situations, you know, their mind becomes frantic. You know, they're not as composed. They've lost all their technique that they've just worked so hard on. And then, you know, a couple of words, try and bring them back in, refocus them. And then over time, you find that you're refocusing them less. You know, and obviously, then when they fight, they don't get that same adrenaline dump. They don't get that same fight or flight response. You know, they're a lot more calm. And then some guys that have had, like, you know, some of those Thai guys have had like 300 fights. It's basically just waking up and getting dressed and that, you know, like they're just basically backstage having a sing and a dance. It doesn't mean anything to those guys. But I think to develop it, they need to be put in those situations where it encourages that response, and then have them try and refocus their purpose during that moment, so it becomes a little bit more clear and understanding.
And I guess that's sort of similar in different situations too, like take it in rehab or in business. Like it gets to a point where, or sport, you know, it gets to a point where you can train all day long. Like I can prep you to return to, you know, footy, and we can be in the gym and we can be doing our strength and our conditioning, and you can even be at training, but it comes to a point where you've just got to be in that position of intensity, unexpectedness, and that kind of ability to understand what the subconscious does, and then have that conscious control in those positions. And it purely just takes being predisposed to that over periods of time to get better at it. But like you said, I think it's interesting that sometimes you do it and you understand it, and then you can kind of reflect on it, and however you go into another, you know, a harder position, and it's kind of like it's a completely new environment. And even though sometimes what you've learned, or how you respond in this situation, you might not be in that situation again because it might be something harder. So it is just a matter of doing it.
Yeah. 100%. You can't get better at it without being put in that situation. It's not one of those things that I can read about. I can't read about it. I can't, you know, watch a video about it. You have to be put in that situation over and over again. Otherwise, it's something you can't learn. It's the same way I don't think you can teach someone mental resilience through getting them to watch a video or reading some lines in a book. You know, it has to be, it's one of the few things that has to be physically felt and then learned.
Yeah, exactly. It's that I guess response, or dealing with a sense of defeat or failure. Do you find that has improved for you over time? Was that something you've struggled with?
Losing.
Yeah, failure. Yeah, losing. That little
I
voice
hate
in your
losing.
head that tells you you're a lazy, fat, you know
Yeah.
what? That now has actually won.
Now he just constantly sits in my head, and I've just turned him down a little bit, so I just ignore it. I hate losing. I've always hate losing. What I've done is I've gotten, I suppose I've not gotten better at it. I suppose I've gotten worse at it. I've just stopped caring about a lot of things. You know, like when I was younger, I was like, if we're playing table tennis or ping pong with a mate, like if I lost, that was it. Like that would send me off. Like I was super angry about losing. Where now I'm like, I just don't care. Like it's a ping pong, we're having fun. Like, you know, like I've gotten a little bit more relaxed. There's still certain situations where I get fired up because I just hate losing. You know, like I still got that fire. But I suppose what I have gotten better at is understanding the process that led me to that loss or that failure, and then trying to make sure that it doesn't happen again, or doesn't happen the same way. So for me, jiu-jitsu is a prime example of dealing with that. You know, every time you get tapped, like you could look at it as a loss, I suppose. But I mean, we get tapped heaps in the gym. But for me, I've changed the way in which I look at tapping. Like, you know, like I said, 15 years ago, if I got tapped in the gym, I'd be angry and furious. And where now I dissect the process that led me to getting tapped, and going, hey, well, I'm going to try the exact same process again, but I'm going to change one or two details and now see if it's the same ending or I get the result that I wanted. So I suppose I use that failure as a lot more of a learning curve without the attack on my ego every time I get into that situation. Where when I was fighting, it would be an attack, I suppose, on my ego. Oh, you got caught, and then, that little voice in the head, well, you got caught, you suck, you're going to lose this fight. Where now I'm like, all right, you got caught. What did you put, how did you put yourself in that situation to be caught? Or what did your a partner do to set you up for that situation, I suppose? So I think which is a much better learning environment. Like the guys in the gym are not my opponents. The guys in the gym are my training partners, and I got to use them the same way, and that's taken me a long time to come to that realization in some aspects.
Well, I guess in that instinct too, like being someone that hates losing, like when you have that approach too, you look at it at the end, you go, well, I haven't lost because like I've only gotten better from it. So like I've actually won, as weird as that sounds, because you've actually benefited from it. And that's that little thing that, for some people they do, people do have, this is something I've been looking into a bit more lately, is that people do have status. So there's a difference between status and ego. And like status it's actually a human instinct. So way back when we look at status, it means you get food, you get water, you probably get shelter, medical attention. Like status meant that there's a survival instinct that comes with status. And I guess we look at status and ego as similar sort of things. But do we look at, is it ego driven for an emotional, I guess, to fuel me emotionally, or is it to kind of like fuel my status? And when you look at it in a sense of like, well, I've actually already won, it's you're feeling that status, that really good human instinct, because you're actually benefiting from it, but it's not to a point of it's your ego taking over that's emotionally kicking into overdrive. So it's really quite interesting because every bloke, but every person has a sense of status or ego. It's just, does it take to fuel that? So like it's quite interesting as to when we can actually be in positions and learn over time and change the way we think about that, we can actually change how it fuels our status or our ego.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'd never actually heard the concept before, but it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? That's good.
It's something that I heard on a podcast, and it's been something that I use to make a lot of decisions as well. Like, is someone coming to me? Because I guess when someone or something, there's a form of something that fuels your ego, it has an ability of then control for you, because if it is taken away or if it's given more, it has that ability to control that ego. But knowing, well, all it takes for my, I guess, internal status to be fulfilled is this. If that's just an ego thing, I don't want that to be the thing that controls me. I want the thing that drives me is to be this force that's actually beneficial to the outcome.
Yeah. I suppose that's a good way of looking at it, and I suppose they'll give you something to analyze and consider in the decisions that you make, whether you're just doing this to stroke, like you said, your ego, or whether to actually make yourself better in the form of a status. So yeah, I never actually thought about that. That's pretty cool. I have to start thinking about the decisions I make now. I have to become more.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the things that you learn and how you can reflect on it. But the last thing I just sort of wanted to touch on is how you feel, I guess, the importance of support systems when it comes to you as a person, to what you achieve as an athlete, and then with regards to your gym and business as well.
Yeah, I think support systems are important. I think I spoke about this a little bit last time. Is as an athlete, you got to be willing to do things without someone with you the entire time. Like you can't have a little friend. In a lot of cases, you're gonna have to do things that are super uncomfortable that you don't want to do, like 4 a.m. runs or whatever. That nobody's gonna get up and run with you. So you got to have that internal motivation, I suppose, to do those things. But in relation to other things, I think support is super important. Guys that you look up to, mentors. I got guys that I call before I make a decision all the time. You know, I'm like, hey, I'll run this by you. I trust you. You know, tell me, am I crazy? Does it sound good? What things do we change? What am I missing? Is there anything that I can't see? You know, so I think trusting in people is super important, but you got to have the right guys that you trust in. You know, like I got guys that be like, hey, mate, your head's in the clouds. You're like way over the mark. Let's bring you back down a little bit. And like you said, you can't have that affect, you know, your emotional state. You know, these guys that I trust, that I call, actually want the best things for me in my business, in training or whatever. So I got to respect them enough to listen to them and actually take on board what they're saying to me. So look, I would not have got to any level that I got to without the right guys beside me. You know, like I said, obviously there was a lot of moments where I was doing stuff by myself, but the guys that I had around me were the ones that directed, supported, encouraged, motivated me, kept me grounded. And like I said, I definitely wouldn't have got to where I achieved without the right team beside me.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and I mentioned this sort of last time we spoke, but I think I really liked your approach in that, in the sense that, yes, having a support system is so important, and having the right friends, family, partner, etc., is so important in every aspect of life, because it can make life 10 times worse. But on the contrary to that, I think that shouldn't be at a sacrifice of God. There needs to be that internal driver outside of all that anyway. Regardless of if everyone was to walk out of your life tomorrow, you would still have that moving forward, I guess, mindset, and that goals, driven mindset. And that's what I really liked about your view on that, is that we do, it's not to say we focus too much on, other people in our life, but there has to be that self-fulfilling sort of take accountability, take responsibility, got to do it regardless sort of situation. So that's what I really valued about your opinion in that.
Yeah, no, thanks.
No, that's basically everything that I really wanted to talk about today. But is there anything that you would say from an advice point of view that you would want to leave our listeners with today when it comes to, I guess, mental toughness and taking that responsibility in yourself and things that you've learned? Is there any sort of advice that you would leave us with today?
Try and find things that are slightly difficult every day to achieve, and they can be small things. So you can start to build up that mental resilience as you go. And then obviously finding the correct coaches or mentors or people that, you can look up to and ask questions that they can direct you positively. And give you a direction. And like I said, it can be in business, it can be in academia, it can be in sports. It doesn't matter. But I think building mental resilience is so important in anything that you do, that you might as well just start getting comfortable, being uncomfortable from the get-go. Like if you want to succeed in anything, there are going to be moments that are going to be super uncomfortable, super confronting. And if you haven't developed those skills early on, they're going to be huge roadblocks. And that some of you might not be able to get over. So I think, just building that mental resilience slowly, day by day, step by step, and finding the right people around you to help you along.
Exactly. I think this sort of day, like it's so easy to make things comfortable. Like we have so much now to make anything easy if we want. Like it doesn't really, I guess, matter to what extent. There's always ways in which we try and then naturally do that ourselves. So it's really good to hear from you, in a sense of sometimes you just have to do things difficult and push yourself to a certain point. And we can actually be, I guess, being too easy or kind to ourselves can actually be of detriment. So I think we do tend to let's say building a business, people say, oh, it's, you've got to not burn yourself out, and you've got to still make sure that you get all this, and still make sure that you're not too I don't know, you're not working too hard, and you go, it doesn't work like that. Like if you actually want to do it right, like it just doesn't work like that. And we need to take that responsibility sometimes. So thank you so much for coming on today and talking to me for the second time. I really appreciate it. I think I definitely know today my brain was so much better than 8 o'clock at night when I'm woken up super early. So it was a lot better for me anyway, which was good. And hopefully it was for you too. But no, I just wanted to say a big thank you. And, I really do. I think you're in a position now where you've been through so much. You've pushed your body through so much in such a challenging and I guess in such a growth way. I don't even know if that's a way that you could say it, but what you've learned about your mind and your body, and now you're doing that and teaching that with, students at school, and then through your gym with your athletes, and then people just generally wanting to see what their body is capable. I think coming from someone like yourself, where you've had that experience at no cost other than your hard work and resilience, is really quite amazing. Because when it comes to people in my life that I have learnt from, it's not about how good they look online. It's not about the one thing that they've achieved. It's about the substance below it. I've just recently gotten a business mentor through this leadership program, and I couldn't give a rat's about that person online that's got 100,000 followers that they can sit there and tell you, keep going, you'll be fine, just get that. No, like I want someone that's suffered. I want someone that's failed and succeeded to the point where they're at a point to be a mentor. They've got that substance and they can give advice, education, and tailor that in the best way they possibly can to, someone who is trying and developing themselves. So I'm with what you're doing with your gym and with school. Like I just think people need to realize that it's about the substance and the growth. It's not about, oh, he went to UFC, so let's just, listen to what he says. It's about the finer details. And that's just obviously a very amazing, a well-deserved achievement. But you have so much substance behind your methods of teaching and the way you go about it. And I love the no shit attitude to it, I guess. Like, one thing I hate, especially in business, is I'm sorry, but if you're there thinking all I need is a pat on the back, for God's sakes, I'm not ready. Like I need the the truth, the hard work. I need someone that's going to, I'm going to show up and they're going to show up with me. And I think that is the kind of person, or that is the kind of methods that you teach to allow someone to be the best that they can be. And that's really awesome, because in this day and age, like, it is very hard to find. So yeah, I just wanted to thank you so much for your insight, and thank you for, just the what you're doing with regards to your businesses, and just coming on and sharing with all of us today. So I'm super keen to see what's sort of next for you and what's next for the gym, and I'm always following it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was great.